Every era of human history has had one thing in common. Someone, somewhere, decided that the most important thing they could do with their civilization's entire wealth was destroy someone else's. This is the story of the most expensive battles from every era of human history, ranked by the financial cost of the equipment, the weapons, and the sheer industrial scale of destruction each one represents. We're counting down from 10 to 1, starting 3,000 years ago in the Syrian desert. The ancient world, the Battle of Kadesh. Two of the most powerful empires on Earth spent years building up to a single day of combat, and both of them claimed they won. Pharaoh Ramesses II of Egypt and King Muwatalli II of the Hittite Empire met on the Orontes River in what is now Syria in May of 1274 BC. Between them, they fielded somewhere in the region of 5,000 to 6,000 chariots, the most expensive and technologically advanced weapons platform of the Bronze Age. Each chariot required skilled craftsmen, high-grade timber, bronze metalwork, trained war horses, and a crew that spent years learning to fight from a moving vehicle. Ramesses had been running weapons factories at Pi-Ramesses, producing 250 chariots every 2 weeks in the lead-up to the battle. The Hittite king Muwatalli had financially depleted his treasury recruiting mercenaries from 19 allied states, leaving many of his own troops unpaid and fighting on the promise of plunder. Egypt mobilized 4 full army divisions, Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth, each numbering around 5,000 men. The Hittites brought 40,000 infantry and 3,000 chariots of their own. The battle ended inconclusively. Both sides carved victory monuments. Neither took the city. 15 years later, they signed the world's first known peace treaty, a copy of which now sits in the United Nations headquarters in New York. In today's money, the combined military mobilization of 2 Bronze Age superpowers for a single battle that settled nothing is estimated at several $billion in equivalent economic output. The most expensive draw in the ancient world. The classical era. The Battle of Cannae. Rome built the largest army in its history, sent it to destroy Hannibal, and lost most of it in an afternoon. In 216 BC, the Roman Republic fielded approximately 86,000 men. Consular armies combined into a single force, the largest Rome had ever assembled. Each legionary carried a gladius, a pilum, body armor, and a shield. The cavalry wings were fully equipped. The quartermaster operation feeding and equipping that force represented an enormous fraction of the Republic's annual budget. Hannibal of Carthage met them with around 50,000 troops, drew the Roman center forward, bent his line deliberately, and then collapsed it around them. By nightfall, between 55,000 and 70,000 Romans lay dead. The battlefield cost to Rome was catastrophic, not only in the men themselves, but in the equipment. Tens of thousands of sets of legionary armor, weapons, horses, and supplies were either destroyed or captured. Hannibal famously collected the gold rings from dead Roman knights, 3 bushels of them, sent to Carthage as proof of the slaughter. Rome had written off an entire army's worth of equipment in a single engagement. The treasury was bare within weeks. In today's equivalent purchasing power, replacing the equipment and manpower lost at Cannae would run to several $billion. Rome refused to negotiate. They rebuilt. And they won the war anyway. The medieval age, the Battle of Manzikert. The Byzantine Empire lost a battle in one afternoon and spent the next 4 centuries paying for it. On August 26, 1071, Emperor Romanus IV Diogenes led the Byzantine army east to confront the Seljuk Turks under Sultan Alp Arslan. The Byzantine army was the most expensively equipped force in the medieval Christian world, heavy cavalry and lamellar armor, Varangian Guard mercenaries paid in silver, professional infantry, and an extensive logistical train funded by centuries of Roman taxation. Treachery undid Romanus. Turkish mercenaries defected the night before battle. A general named Andronicus Ducas fled with his men at the critical moment. The emperor was captured. The first time in Byzantine history a sitting emperor had been taken prisoner in the field. The military losses were serious. But the real financial catastrophe came after. The loss of Anatolia, the empire's primary agricultural base and the source of the majority of its military recruits, stripped Byzantium of the tax revenue and manpower it needed to maintain its army. Within a decade, Turkish forces had reached Nicaea, within sight of Constantinople itself. The cost of Manzikert was not what was destroyed on the battlefield. It was the systematic economic destruction of an empire that never fully recovered. In today's terms, the downstream economic loss to Byzantium from a single afternoon's defeat is estimated at tens of billions of dollars in lost revenue, territory, and military capacity over the decades that followed. The Age of Empires, the Battle of Mohacs. The Ottoman Empire brought the most expensive war machine on earth to a Hungarian field, and the result lasted 2 hours. On August 29, 1526, Suleiman the Magnificent marched into Hungary with a force of at least 50,000 men, 300 cannons, and an Ottoman military apparatus that was the most sophisticated and most expensively maintained on the planet. The Ottoman army operated on a logistical system that could move massive forces across vast distances, supply chains, organized artillery trains, elite Janissary infantry armed with arquebuses and Sipahi cavalry. Against them, King Louis II of Hungary assembled 25,000 men and 85 cannons, roughly a quarter of the Ottoman firepower. The Hungarian nobility had refused to wait for Croatian and Transylvanian reinforcements. The cavalry charged the Ottoman vanguard, caused real damage, and was then outflanked, encircled, and annihilated by coordinated cannon fire and fast-moving Ottoman cavalry. King Louis II was killed fleeing the field. Thrown from his horse, he drowned in a stream. The entire Hungarian nobility that had ridden into battle was effectively wiped out in one engagement. The Kingdom of Hungary ceased to exist as an independent state for nearly 150 years. In today's money, the Ottoman military mobilization for Mohacs, the logistics, the artillery, the professional standing army, is estimated at several billion dollars in equivalent expenditure. The return on investment was an entire kingdom. The Renaissance and gunpowder era, the Battle of Blenheim. Louis XIV spent 60 years building the finest army in Europe, and Marlborough wrecked it in a single afternoon. By 1704, the War of the Spanish Succession had been running for 3 years, and France's war machine was the most expensive state military apparatus in the Western world. Louis XIV had built a professional standing army of 125,000 men through decades of centralized military reform. The armies that met at Blenheim on August 13, 1704, totaled roughly 112,000 troops, 60,000 French and Bavarians under Marshal Tallard, 52,000 allied British, Dutch, and Austrians under the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy. Both sides fielded approximately 85 to 88 artillery pieces. Each regiment carried full equipment, ammunition, and a supply train that had marched hundreds of miles to reach the battlefield. Marlborough's approach march alone, 250 miles in 5 weeks from the Netherlands to the Danube, was a logistical operation that consumed several million pounds sterling. The Allied victory was decisive. The French lost around 30,000 men killed, wounded, or captured, including Marshal Tallard himself. An entire army's worth of guns, horses, equipment, and supplies fell into Allied hands. It was France's first major land defeat in over 50 years. Marlborough was rewarded with Blenheim Palace, built at a cost of £240,000 as a gift from Queen Anne. In today's dollars, the total military expenditure on both sides at Blenheim is estimated at over $2 billion, a staggering sum for a single day's fighting in an age of muskets and horses. The Napoleonic era, the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon needed 500,000 artillery shells, ran short on muskets, and went to battle anyway. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon's rebuilt French army of 72,000 men met Wellington's allied force of 68,000 and Blücher's 70,000 Prussians near the Belgian village of Waterloo. The French fielded 254 guns. Napoleon's cavalry included 14 regiments of armored cuirassiers, heavy cavalry and burnished steel breastplates that each cost a year's wages to produce. The logistics were strained from the start. France had been demobilized. Napoleon needed 500,000 artillery projectiles, faced chronic shortages of muskets and horses, and rebuilt an army in weeks. By the end of the battle, 7,000 to 10,000 horses lay dead on the field. Total casualties across all 3 armies ran to 68,000 men killed, wounded, or missing in a single day. Napoleon's treasury, already emptied by 23 years of nearly continuous warfare, was finished. In today's dollars, the total financial cost of the Waterloo campaign is estimated at between $5 billion and $8 billion. It ended 23 years of recurrent European warfare, and it ended Napoleon, the Industrial Age, the Battle of Tsushima. Russia spent years and a fortune sailing its fleet halfway around the world to have it destroyed in 48 hours. In October 1904, Tsar Nicholas II dispatched the Russian Baltic Fleet, 45 warships, including 11 battleships, on an 18,000-mile voyage around Africa and Asia to reinforce Russian naval power in the Pacific. The fleet consumed enormous quantities of coal at every stop, requiring hired colliers to follow them around the globe. On May 27, 1905, the exhausted Russian fleet entered the Tsushima Strait between Japan and Korea. Admiral Togo's fleet was waiting. The battle lasted 2 days. By the end, more than 30 Russian ships had been sunk or captured. Russia lost 4 battleships, multiple cruisers, and essentially its entire Pacific naval ambition. The Japanese lost no heavy ships and just 117 men. The total cost of the Russo-Japanese War to Japan was $100 million in 1905 dollars. Russia's losses at Tsushima, the ships, the crew, the 18-month preparation, represented a financial catastrophe that contributed directly to the revolution of 1905. In today's dollars, replacing the Russian ships lost at Tsushima would cost between $10 and $15 billion. It was the most complete destruction of a modern naval fleet in a single engagement, a financial loss that helped topple a dynasty. The Great War, the Battle of Verdun, 33 million shells, 10 months, and the ground is still too toxic to farm. The Battle of Verdun began on February 21, 1916, when the Germans opened with an artillery bombardment of 1 million shells in the opening hours of the battle. It lasted until December 18th, 10 months of continuous combat along a front just a few miles wide. France and Germany combined fired approximately 33 million artillery shells over the course of the battle. French guns alone fired over 10 million rounds of field artillery, more than 1 million medium-caliber shells, and 600,000 large-caliber rounds. The German army expended 23 million shells. More than 1,200 artillery pieces were deployed on the German side at the opening of the battle alone. The shell costs alone, calculated at modern artillery ammunition prices of $2,000 to $5,000 per round, would run to between $66 billion and $165 billion in today's money for the ammunition fired at Verdun. And that is just the shells. The total military expenditure of France and Germany on men, equipment, food, transportation, and logistics over 10 months makes Verdun one of the most financially destructive individual battles in human history. The French Interior Ministry estimates that over 10 million shells remain unexploded in the soil around Verdun today. Bomb-clearing units remove approximately 40 tons of unexploded ordnance from the area every single year. At current rates of clearance, the cleanup will take centuries. Verdun is still paying its bill. The Second World War, the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in the history of warfare. 6,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft, 2 months, and one side could replace their losses. The other could not. The Battle of Kursk began on July 5, 1943, when Germany launched Operation Citadel against a Soviet salient in western Russia. The Germans committed 900,000 men, 2,700 tanks and assault guns, including their newest Tiger and Panther tanks, and 2,000 aircraft. The Soviets had spent months building 8 defensive belts, laying 1 million landmines, and digging 5,000 kilometers of trenches. They massed 1.3 million men, 3,600 tanks, 20,000 artillery pieces, and 2,792 aircraft. 46% of the entire Red Army's tank strength concentrated in one area. A single German Tiger tank cost approximately 250,000 Reichsmarks to produce. A Soviet T-34 cost around 135,000 rubles. By the battle's end, the Germans had lost between 750 and 1,200 tanks and 681 aircraft. The Soviets lost approximately 7,000 tanks and 3,000 aircraft, staggering numbers that they were able to replace within months because Soviet factories were producing 2,000 tanks per month at peak output. Germany could not. The opening day of the air battle on July the 5th was the single costliest day in the history of aerial warfare in terms of aircraft destroyed. In today's dollars, replacing all the equipment destroyed at Kursk, the tanks at $6 to $15 million each, the aircraft at $20 to $50 million each, puts the total material cost of the battle at somewhere between $50 billion and $80 billion. Kursk permanently ended Germany's ability to launch offensive operations on the Eastern Front. After Kursk, Germany was losing a war it could no longer afford to fight. The Cold War and modern era. Operation Desert Storm, $500 million a day, 100,000 sorties, 42 days. And it wasn't even close. On January 17, 1991, the United States, and a coalition of 35 nations launched the most expensive military operation since the Second World War against Iraqi forces in Kuwait. The air campaign alone cost an estimated $200 million per day in munitions. Fuel for the 1,000-plus aircraft operating daily added another $50 million. Each Tomahawk cruise missile cost $1.4 million, and the U.S. fired 288 of them in the opening hours. Each Patriot missile interceptor cost $1.1 million per unit. Each F-117 stealth fighter that slipped through Iraqi air defenses carried a unit cost of $42 million. The first American aircraft lost, a Navy FA-18, had a price tag of $30.8 million. Over 42 days, coalition aircraft flew more than 100,000 combat sorties, systematically destroying Iraqi command, communications, armor, and infrastructure. The U.S. Government Accountability Office estimated the total cost of Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm at over $61 billion in direct U.S. expenditure. Allied contributions, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and others added another $48 billion to the total. The GAO's full accounting, including indirect costs, exceeded $100 billion. The ground war lasted 100 hours. Iraq lost approximately 3,700 tanks, 2,400 armored personnel carriers, and 2,600 artillery pieces. In today's dollars, Operation Desert Storm cost approximately $230 billion. It remains the most expensive single military operation in the modern era, and arguably the most financially one-sided military victory in history. From the chariot factories of Ramesses II to the cruise missiles of Desert Storm, every era found a way to spend more on war than the previous one thought was possible. The weapons changed, the financial scale grew, and the bill in every era was always larger than the estimate. If you want to keep following the money through history, subscribe to The Price Explainer. Every price tag has a story.